Whatever it is you wish to say to me, I shall receive it with an open heart.
I did not come here to toast the Elven Rings.
Season 2 lives or dies on like the Celebrimbor Sauron relationship. Like how like what do you make of it? What do you think of it? Do you find it interesting? I think yes, there are other plots, there are other things happening in this show, but we spend so much time with the two, and so much of the plot and the emotions of season 2 are tied up in these two characters and what you make of that relationship. And I just never fully bought what the show was selling. And the whole thing doesn't fall apart from there, but it made it a lot more rickety when I didn't fully buy the central component of the season. Or at least I found I wanted to buy it more than what the show was putting in front of me. And so you kind of go from there in terms of the rest of the show, because that's the meal. That's the meal of the season.
Linchpin of the season. I would agree with you. I agree with you that that's the linchpin of the season. I'm kind of curious to hear more details about why you didn't buy it, and we'll get into that in a little bit. That said, Jessie Earl, let's hear from you. What do you think of season 2 of the show?
I am probably on the same wavelength, but I am on the opposite end where it's I think season 2 is a step up from season 1. I think it improved all the strengths of the show of season 1. I think took a step forward and improved. I think agreeing with you on that being the linchpin of the season, that relationship. And I think it adds so much to this season to know who Sauron is. I mean, my big problem with season 1 was it was a lot of mystery boxes. Who is the stranger? Who is Sauron? What's going on with that weird sword that they need to stick in the hole or whatever? It's a lot of nonsense mystery boxes that just made it hard to invest in what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas this season, you kind of know the stakes and you know who's who, and it's kind of fun seeing Sauron be like a catty, chatty coworker. Like, hey, this is your boss is kind of a jerk. And I found that to be fun. And I found most of the other storylines that worked, like the dwarf storylines and things like that, were all still just very strong and actually improved to a large degree. But I also agree with Patrick. The weaknesses of season 1 are also still present and also get somewhat amplified as well. And everything to do with the humans, man. I think it's slightly better than season 1, but not by much. And I think it's overweighed by the fact that it gets so much more screen time. And it's still not interesting. So
I will say I'm in the camp of, I think season 2 is overall a step forward or above season 1. I actually think it's an improvement. What do I like about the show? First of all, it continues to look excellent, right?
Mm-hmm,
It is some of the best CG I on TV you can watch right now. And it actually makes you realize what's possible with CG. There's so much CG that we see that's not great, not because of the artist necessarily, but because of other constraints. And it's wow, 95% of the time I'm convinced, or if I'm not convinced, then at least I'm I appreciate aesthetically what they're trying to show us on screen, right?
And it's worth. Oh, sorry. Worth saying they do a lot of practical stuff too. For example,
absolutely.
that scene where they go from day into night, in one single shot. That was all done practically in one take.
Amazing.
Sorry.
So the show looks amazing, and you know what? As I think about it, I'm I don't even have a problem. There's so many things about the show that are good. The acting, I think, is overall really good. Everyone's giving it their all. Even the dialogue, I think, is actually really solid. There's a lot of scenes where people have speeches, and the speeches are really good, and there's some really interesting turns of phrase. And I don't know how much of it's borrowed from Tolkien, but it's just even the dialogue I can't even find fault with. So anyway, those are my overall thoughts, and we can dive more into it right now. So Patrick Klepek, let's start with you. Celebrimbor and Sauron. Why didn't this work for you? And you know what? I'm going to try to answer that question for you. Even though I just asked it.
I'm going to move my mouth, and then you just start talking, and we'll just, in post, we'll put it all together.
So there's this concept in writing or drama called dramatic irony, right? That is when the viewer knows something that the characters on screen do not, right? And that can be pretty interesting as a dynamic to play with. It can also be extremely frustrating because it's hard for the audience to be so far ahead of the characters on screen. It's these characters are dumb. They don't know what I know, and I easily figured it out, and that's frustrating. And if I'm supposed to respect this character that doesn't know the thing, that puts me as a viewer in a difficult situation. And I think that's primarily the issue with Celebrimbor is like, clearly this guy is evil. And no one can recognize, like, this guy who's supposedly brilliant can't seem to recognize that. And I actually don't think it's the worst thing in the world to have to introduce that dynamic. But the problem with the show is it extends that dynamic for like 7 episodes, basically, right? Like, and I remember Jesse, when we were covering House of the Dragon, there was an episode where there's like these twin characters, right, on that show, and one of them was gonna like pretend to be the other twin character, like infiltrate this castle, and we're like, oh, this could get like pretty dicey. This could get pretty annoying, like with this one guy imitating the other character, and then literally within half an episode, the whole plot line is resolved, right? Like, and that's happened on a bunch of other shows we've covered, Patrick, where like they'll introduce this thing of like, oh, so and so is deceiving these other people. Literally, it's resolved within an episode because I think people know that's like frustrating to watch. Screenwriters know that's frustrating to watch. So that's I think the big issue is like, like I can't believe no one has been able to get word to Celebrimbor that this guy is evil. All right, Patrick Klepek, how'd I do?
Well, you're right in the specifics of that dynamic, why it didn't work with me. But it speaks to a larger issue I have with the show that I think may hopefully work in its favor. If it's greenlit and it continues. This show has spent 2 seasons going, our characters are so far apart from each other, and it has like it is these contrivance to try and get these other characters in, to create dynamics between the different factions. Like, it's as though all the chess pieces are scattered out on the map very far apart. It's like, well, how do we get everyone to care about them? Well, we want to get them to overlap, but there's like very few reasons to get them to overlap. And so the Celebrimbor and Sauron stuff, like on the page, that's a great and interesting arc. Like, give it this brilliant character that is easily deceived because they want to, like, they get sort of taken by this very charismatic character. And the actor does I really like the Sauron like actor. I think he does a really good job with the material that he is given. It's the way that it's distributed over the course of the season that I think ends up undercutting whatever success they might have at establishing that dynamic over a period of time. And I just think they have to stretch it so far so they can get to the end of this season that, like, I believe it in the beginning. It strains all belief in the middle. And then I kind of bought it again in the end. Like,
I agree.
By the time they got to the magic stuff and like they turn him to like a really sad, desperate character in that tower, like, I see on the page, I see the pitch, I buy what you want to do with this arc. The unfortunate part is, I think, in looking back at the past 2 seasons of Rings of Power, I think that is 1 season of television that was told over 2. And if those just storylines had been condensed in a way, I think we get characters in places faster. I think the storylines are more satisfying. I'm way less annoyed at, like, I know who the stranger is. Like, please, like, don't make that a last second reveal at the end of season 2. And of course, that's what they do. And it's just all that stuff. I think the best stuff, that the material they have, ends up feeling so strained because it has to go on for so long. And it's like the effects do their job, the actors do their job, but it just takes so long to get there that you feel kind of bored and stretched in the process. And the whole show feels stretched in that way.
I kind of agree with that assessment. Like, imagine if the Celebrimbor Sauron stuff had lasted like 3 episodes instead of 6.5. I feel like it would be much more effective. I think, but I will say this: by the end, I was like, it was like a bruising path to get to the final 2 to 3 episodes. But by the end, when he's like doing the Jedi mind tricks on him and making him see a different universe,
it's great.
That stuff is cool, man. That is amazing.
The way he figures out with the mouse, I mean, like, all that stuff is like
that stuff is really cool, and also just the idea of like understanding what Celebrimbor would need. And it's not like, I'm going to like beat you into submission or threaten your life. It's like appealing to his vanity and appealing to his desire for peace and appealing to all these things. Like, that's a cool concept. I just think it just, like, as you said, Patrick, it was stretched a little bit too far. That said, Jessie Earl, really curious, what did you think of the main relationship this season, Celebrimbor and Sauron?
Yeah, gosh, so many things I was thinking of throughout all of this.
Yeah.
I mean, I agree with both of you. I think pacing and structure are the biggest things the show has going against it. This is a bigger problem in season 1, but season 2 definitely has it as well, where it's you don't even really get a sense of tension from time. Like, we always have these people like, we need to hurry to get somewhere, we need to give him this piece of information. There's even some stuff here about like, we need to have him figure out that he's Sauron, and we keep missing Celebrimbor learning that fact. But it's kind of put aside, and you don't feel it as much because we just never have a good sense of like, how long does the season take place over? Theoretically months, but it could also have been a few days. Like, it doesn't really give us
I almost
a good
wanted
sense of
sometimes
that.
like a like the orcs are 7 days away. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Some
just
sort
someone
of
to say
thing.
it, yeah.
Like,
Right. Well,
Yeah.
gives
the
me
thing
some
is,
weight.
like, it's taking Galadriel and Elrond forever to get to Celebrimbor, but like Durin seems to be whipping back and forth, like,
Yeah,
no
from,
problem.
from Khazad-dûm all the time. Yeah,
Right, which I understand, like, geographically that might work for Middle Earth, but it's just like a weird.
Even
It's weird
then,
to
it
see like
doesn't
one
entirely,
group
yeah.
of characters try really hard to get to another character and like not be able to get to them for like many episodes.
It's a
Meanwhile,
little bit
another
like
character's
early
yeah.
Game of Thrones, like it took forever for characters to get to a place, and there was a certain weight that they were able to imbue that time in between
Right.
getting places. And then latter half Game of Thrones is like, I don't know, they're just there. Like, don't worry about it. Like, they're just, and it just
Mhm.
feels very that convenience. Like, it's not the first time it happens it bothers you. It's like over the course of the season, you're like, wait a second, we're spending a lot of time watching these people climb a mountain. And it's like, it's so hard and it's so far.
Anyway, Jesse, continue.
Yeah, no, I just agree with all of that. Like, it's because you have like people being like during coming back really quickly. You have, I think, Sauron gets from Mordor to Celebrimbor's place in like half an episode. Like, at the end of an episode, he gets there. So yeah, that's I think a big problem with the major season. That being said, I agree with both of you. I think that this relationship that these two characters had, I think, really works in the beginning and really works at the end. And I really love the vanity aspect of it, because it makes me think of like to make it like a contemporary example, would be like an artist getting like a rich capitalist funder and being like, hey, I want to support you, I'll give you everything you want, everything's fine, the world outside's fine, just keep making your art, and like sucking his soul dry for all the money and shoving it out into the world. And I think that that's an interesting dynamic to play with, especially with Sauron. And I love
He's basically the ultimate VC.
funder.
Backer.
Exactly. He really
He's
is.
the ultimate VC backer. Like, don't worry about market
It's all
conditions.
fine.
Yeah.
Don't
Yes,
look
just
outside. It's all
Get to your MLP as quickly as possible. Basically. Yeah.
But I do, and this is kind of gets to why I have a soft spot for this show. Kind of what you're hitting at the end is I really love that tragedy that you feel at the end of the loss of beautiful things that we get through this storyline. Because I really think this show captures in an interesting way the essence of what Tolkien was trying to do. I think season 1 was trying to be Game of Thrones light a little bit, whereas this season, and why I really like this season, and I think this story in particular and some other places, is it I think better captures that idea of corruption and power and pain. And I think it extends it out in a really interesting way, because in The Lord of the Rings, Sauron represented like just evil, just pure unmitigated evil. He's a big eye in a tower and just stares at you and wants to destroy the world. Here, there's a little bit more complexity in his character, like at the end where he's talking about how he's treating other people like Morgoth is treating him, who was the sort of big bad even above Sauron in the first age of Tolkien. And it extends out that idea of like how people end up in these situations where they are willing to want to corrupt and control and dominate and become totalitarians or what have you. And I think that this show extending that out and doing it in the opposite direction of how beautiful things get corrupted, I think versus how you preserve good things in the middle of corruption, like the Lord of the Rings kind of goes for, even though it also has elements of the corruption aspect as well. I think it's a really cool use of that theme, to the point where there's an interesting, one of the big things that the show got knocked for is they subverted the order the rings are made in. In the Silmarillion, which this book is not based on. It's based on the the appendices for the Lord of the Rings. They do it in the opposite direction. The elven rings are made last, and like Celebrimbor casts Sauron out and makes those last at the end. And they're the sort of pure, unadulterated rings. Here we go the opposite way, and I think it kind of matches what the show wants to do. Of like, hey, there's this beautiful thing that this artist made that then gets corrupted over time. And so I think that like this storyline with the two of them is a good encapsulation of that, and why I think, despite the show's flaws, I end up really loving it, because it does have that ethos of Tolkien in this season that I don't think we don't get a lot of in other fantasy even nowadays, because it's all sort of Game of Thronesified.
Yeah. One of my favorite moments from the season is when Celebrimbor finally at the end, he like breaks out of his mental prison and he
Mhm.
encounters Murdania at the castle walls. And he tries to like convince everyone that it's actually Sauron that's evil, and like no
Mhm.
one believes him. And it's at that moment you realize like, and actually that was when I was like, oh my gosh, the plot line actually worked, because
Mhm.
I understand why Murdania thinks Celebrimbor is out of his gourd. And
Mhm.
it's kind of like it gives this feeling, as you were saying, Jesse, of like at some point, or related to what you're saying, like at some point you kind of get past this point of no return, of like
Mhm.
the whole time you're realizing Celebrimbor snap out of it, like Celebrimbor snap out of, and then at one point if he does, it's like it doesn't even matter anymore. Like
Yeah.
it doesn't even matter. Like it's too late. You can't like call it back anymore, you know? And I know like the final monologue and the final moments of the season try to like redeem that, you know, but truly they have suffered some really horrific losses. And so at best it's a Pyrrhic victory, right? I mean,
Well,
and so
the
yeah,
oh,
go
sorry.
ahead.
Well, even in that, I think episode 7, I think there's a speech that is really beautiful that I also really like, that kind of goes to that point of the loss of like good things, and sometimes you lose them, and you just have to keep going and make new things will be made, and know that new things will be made. I think that's a really beautiful idea of like things are going to get lost, and that sucks. I mean, there's a plot beat in this season that kind of touches upon another plot point, but they like gather all of Celebrimbor's notes and their orcs burn them, and it's this like sadness of like, oh,
Yeah.
all this knowledge is just gone now, and that's like that's just lost, and it's almost valued even more than the lives that people had to
Yeah.
sacrifice. And I think I think the show sort of saying like that we can go on from, it's not a good thing, it's a very sad thing, but we could keep going on from that. I think it's a really, I don't know, I like those ideas quite a lot. So.
I like how GQ put Sauron's quest this season. It says that the headline was, somehow the Rings of Power season 2 made Sauron relatable. Yes, he ends up becoming a giant flaming eyeball and the would-be conqueror of Middle-earth. But in the second season of Amazon's Lord of the Rings prequel series, he's just one guy who never gives up on his dreams, end quote.
Exactly.
And
I
it's
just
true,
want to rule them.
I think it does a decent job of like giving you some insight. Listen to his, like, I don't think they don't go as far as making him like you don't empathize with
yeah,
Sauron's
but you can
plight.
see where he's coming from, though.
But you can see where he's, which is like,
yeah.
it makes it a more interesting villain. Like
Absolutely.
they go so far as to provide perspective and background and at least some articulated motivation, whether you believe the BS he's spewing or not. And you know, you rarely should from Sauron, but you know, like it was interesting. I read an interview. Well, I read an interview where like when Celebrimbor is giving his final speech about like, you know, you're the one, like, oh, and he says the Lord of the Rings.
Sauron, Lord of the Rings.
Yeah,
the Rings of Power
was,
and the Lord of the Rings in the same season. Come on, have a little restraint. Put it in the first draft, and then someone goes, "No, we probably shouldn't do it," and then they did it twice. But he cries, and they asked the actor, like, "Was that like you know
Charlie
what's going
Vickers,
through?
right, I think.
Yeah, what's going through your mind there? Like, was that in the script?" And from what what he said, like, no, that was just something I sort of felt in the moment. We went with it, and that kind of ended up becoming like Sauron's reaction to that. And I think that's like the closest the show tries to get to like, who is this person? What's their motive? Like, what would prompt them to cry as they realize like they're losing, you know, I think the way the actor interpreted it was he still wants to kill everyone or control everyone, but like he still valued this relationship he had with Celebrimbor and thought they kind of had something, whether it was kind of an implied, like, you know, some people have read it as a sort of romantic throughout the course.
I kind of did. I got some
Jesse,
really.
I was going to ask if like,
oh, I
I
have definitely seen, as someone who is on AO3 decently enough.
I believe that. I believe that people could ship them. I wondered like what you thought, like whether you read into any of that, or like what you thought of that kind of dynamic, that tension that like certainly was there, or at least I don't know, I felt it while watching the season.
Well, I think, yeah, I agree. I think, well, I mean, it's the thing with Sauron. I think, number one, I agree with you. I think there's definitely a romantic tension that you could read into this. I think what the show kind of wants to get at is repeatedly with Sauron, because he also has a similar thing with Galadriel, is kind of showcase the opposite side of what season 1 was doing, which is you see sort of a Galadriel have this relationship with this guy who's pulling her in a bad direction, and him sort of openly manipulating her, as you learn at the end of the season, to get what he wants. Whereas this season, you kind of see the manipulation happening, and you can kind of get to this point of like, yeah, Sauron wants to have earnest relationships. We kind of see it at the beginning of the season in episode 1 with that like prologue we get for the season where we get to see his backstory of what happened to him, and the sort of guy saying you need to perform being good every day, just every single day, to try to be a better person. And I think that's what he wants to do. And he wants to pretend that he has a good relationship, that he is doing good thing, but he can't get over his own desires and desire to manipulate others for what he wants. And you can't have a healthy relationship built on that. So I think that that's kind of what the show is getting at on a interpersonal level between these characters. Like, yeah, there's a romantic tension, but Sauron cannot actually, he cannot ever build that healthily, because he has desire for power and to corrupt others for what he wants them to be.
Hey everyone, David Chen here. Thank you so much for watching that video from Decoding TV. If you want to get an audio version of the show, all you got to do is go to podcast.decodingtv.com. And if you want to support what we do, get ad-free episodes of the podcast and also bonus episodes of the podcast, go to decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more. We appreciate it. Thanks. See you later.